I am Alina Vance. I am an archivist. My world is paper and quiet. I find comfort in ordered silence. I catalog philanthropic foundation histories. They trust me with their records. I ensure their stories are preserved perfectly. The Meridian Archive is my employer. It is a vast, modern building. Its walls hold centuries of charitable intent. My desk sits in a silent row. Fluorescent lights hum a gentle note. This is a place of apparent virtue. I reviewed the Reed Foundation file today. Dr. Alistair Reed is a noted philanthropist. His public generosity funds global hospitals. His annual report was glossy and positive. I logged his latest donation into our system. The public report listed $20 million. Our internal ledger showed a different number. It recorded only $15 million. A $5 million discrepancy existed. It was not annotated or explained. This was a digital ghost. I checked the entry twice. My fingers paused over the keyboard. Archives should not have such ghosts. Consistency is my work's core. This was a tear in the fabric, a small, almost invisible one. I felt a cool prickle of unease. It was likely a clerical error. Such things happen in large systems, yet the number felt quite intentional. 5 million is not a rounding error. It is a specific sum of money. It had simply vanished from record. I created a note for the file. I flagged the entry for review. My supervisor would see it tomorrow. My workday ended at 5 o'clock. The archive emptied of its few staff. I drove to see Lena that evening. Lena was my mentor in graduate school. She taught me archival science and ethics. She was forced into early retirement. Now she lived in a secluded lake house. The drive took 40 peaceful minutes. Pine trees lined the winding road. Her house was clad in weathered cedar. It stood silent against the water. Lena answered the door slowly. Her illness had made her frail, but her eyes were still sharp. They held a familiar, keen intelligence. She smiled at my visit. We sat by the large window. We watched the sunset on the lake. We spoke of old times and old books. Then her expression grew serious. Her gaze fixed on my face. She asked about my work at Meridian. I mentioned the Reed Foundation ledger. I described the $5 million difference. Lena's face became very still. The last light faded from the water. She looked suddenly tired and sad. She said foundations have two faces sometimes. One face is for the public light. The other operates in the deep shade. Her voice was a soft whisper. I leaned forward to hear her. She said archives are not just repositories. They are sometimes crime scenes. She told me to be very careful. Some stories do not want to be found. Then she stood with effort. She walked to an old desk. She opened a small wooden box. Inside was a single brass key. It was small and unassuming. She pressed it into my palm. She closed my fingers over it. She gave no explanation for it. She simply said to keep it safe. She said it might prove useful. Then she changed the subject firmly. We talked of lighter things for an hour. I left as full darkness settled. I felt the key's weight in my pocket. It was cool against my leg. I drove home under a starless sky. I placed the key on my nightstand. I slept poorly that night. My dreams were filled with ledgers. Numbers bled off the pages like ink. I woke to a ringing phone. The call came at 6. It was from Lena's home nurse. Her voice was calm and professional. She told me the simple news. Lena had passed away in the night. It was expected due to her illness. The news still felt like a blow. I thanked the nurse numbly. I sat on the edge of my bed. I stared at the brass key. It gleamed dully in the morning light. Her gift felt like a final mission. It was a last piece of guidance. I dressed for work in a fog. The archive felt different that day. The silence felt heavier and watchful. I went through my morning routine mechanically. I logged into my workstation. I checked the Reed Foundation file. My review note was still there. It was marked as seen by my supervisor. No further action was requested. The discrepancy remained officially ignored. This was my first real contradiction. The system noted the ghost. Then it chose to look away. Power quietly affirmed the error. I felt a surge of quiet defiance. Lena's warning echoed in my mind. I decided to use the key. I needed to know what it opened. The Meridian Archive has many locked drawers. They are old card catalog cabinets. Most contain obsolete index systems. I walked the main floor after lunch. I carried the key casually. I tried it on several old drawers. It did not fit any of them. I moved to the older basement wing. The air grew cooler down there. The lighting was less modern here. I found a row of very old cabinets. They were from the archive's original building. I slid the key into a dusty lock. It turned with a smooth click. The drawer opened soundlessly. Inside were not index cards. I saw a small, folded paper map. It was a diagram of the city metro. A train line was highlighted in red. The 7:50 night metro route was circled. Next to it lay an old staff badge. It bore Lena's photograph and name. Her face looked younger in the picture. Her title was Senior Archival Investigator. I had never heard of that position. This was a new reveal. Lena had a hidden role here. She investigated more than just books. The badge granted her high-level access. I pocketed both items carefully. I closed and locked the drawer again. My heart was beating very fast. I returned to my desk upstairs. I studied the metro map in secret. The red line followed the normal route. Then it extended beyond the public map. The line continued into a blank area. A small X marked an unlisted stop. It was labeled simply Windsor 14. I knew Windsor was the central station. Gate 14 was closed for renovation. That was the public story. The map suggested a different truth. I decided to follow the map's clue. I would take the 7:15 train that night. I needed to see where it went. I needed to understand Lena's secret. My workday ended normally. I left the archive at 5. I went to a cafe for hours. I read a book but absorbed nothing. My mind was on the coming train. At 7, I walked to the metro. I descended into the bustling station. The 7:15 train was on the board. It was a regular commuter line. I used my normal transit card. I boarded a middle carriage. It was moderately full of tired people. I took a seat by the window. The train departed right on time. It moved through the familiar tunnels. It stopped at the expected stations. Passengers disembarked at each stop. The carriage grew progressively emptier. By the last public stop, only 3 remained. I stayed in my seat, pretending to read. The other 2 people got off. The doors closed with a hiss. The train did not move for a moment. Then it began moving forward again. It accelerated into the dark tunnel. We passed the normal service lights. We entered a section of unmarked track. No signs were visible outside. The train's interior lights flickered once. We traveled for several minutes. This was beyond any public route. Then the train began to slow. It glided into a hidden platform. The platform was sleek and modern. It was utterly empty and silent. The doors opened with a soft chime. I remained frozen in my seat. I watched the empty platform. Then a man in a dark suit stood. He had been sitting farther down. I had not noticed him earlier. He disembarked with calm authority. He walked toward a single door. The door was marked Windsor 14. It was the gate from Lena's map. The man did not look back. He entered and the door closed. The train doors remained open. A voice announced the termination here. It instructed all passengers to disembark. I had no choice but to step out. The platform air was cold and still. The train doors closed behind me. The train immediately departed the way it came. I was alone on the hidden platform. The silence was absolute and profound. I stood in a secret place. This was Lena's discovery. I walked toward the Windsor 14 door. It had no visible handle. A keypad glowed softly beside it. I had no code to enter. I was trapped in this silent space. Then I noticed a small intercom panel. I pressed the button cautiously. No voice answered through the intercom, but the door clicked open slightly. It was an inch ajar. Someone had remotely released the lock. This was a clear power shift. I was being allowed to proceed, or perhaps I was being invited in. I pushed the door open slowly. It revealed a carpeted corridor. The lighting was soft and indirect. The corridor led to a staircase. I climbed the stairs carefully. They ended at another door. This one opened into a familiar space. I emerged into Windsor Station's main concourse. I was beside the closed Gate 14. Construction barriers surrounded it officially. I had just exited from behind them. The public station buzzed around me. No one noticed my arrival. I melted into the crowd of travelers. I felt a profound sense of dislocation. The hidden world existed alongside the normal one. I took a different train home. My hands would not stop trembling. I needed to identify the man in the suit. I reached my quiet apartment. I poured a glass of water. My mind replayed the evening's events. The hidden platform was real. Lena's map was a real guide. I opened my personal laptop. I searched the Meridian donor database. I had a secure external login. I scrolled through gallery event photographs. I looked for the man's face. I found him in a charity gala picture. He was smiling beside a mayor. The caption named him clearly. He was Marcus Thorne. Marcus Thorne directed the Thorne Foundation. His foundation was also a Meridian client. His file was on a different floor. I knew his public reputation. He was known for his charm and efficacy. He was a philanthropic pillar. Now I knew he used a secret train. He accessed a hidden platform. I opened the archive's internal network. I searched for memos involving him. I found a special acquisitions fund notice. It was a routing authorization. The memo was addressed to accounting. It directed transfers for sensitive projects. It was signed by a steering committee. The final approval signature was electronic. I clicked to display the signatory. The name was Dr. Alastair Reed. The two threads connected suddenly. Reed's discrepancy and Thorne's secret trip. They were linked by this fund. This was a major new reveal. The secret system had multiple players. I printed the memo carefully. It was my first real document. I placed it with Lena's map and badge. I was building a small dossier. The scale of this was dawning on me. I was not just tracking an error. I was uncovering a hidden network. It used philanthropy as its cover. I felt a deep chill of fear, but I also felt a resolve. Lena had given me the key. She had trusted me with this. I could not stop now. I needed to understand Dr. Reed. Who was the man behind the fortune? His biography would be my next step. I would visit the Carlton reading room tomorrow. It held private papers and biographies. I needed an independent source of information. The archive's records felt compromised now. Sleep was difficult again that night. I stared at my darkened ceiling. The hidden platform stretched behind my eyelids. The silent door marked Windsor 14 loomed large. Marcus Thorne's calm walk replayed in my mind. He moved with such assured ownership. He belonged in that hidden space. I did not belong there at all, yet I had entered it anyway. That fact changed my position entirely. I was now an observer within the machine. The morning brought a gray, drizzling rain. I dressed in neutral, professional clothing. I took the bus to the university district. The Carlton reading room was inside the library. It was silent and grand inside. Smell of old paper and wood polish filled it. I requested Reed's authorized biography. A librarian brought me a large volume. Its title was The Reed Legacy, A Life of Giving. I began reading methodically at a wooden table. His early life was described as humble. He was a research scientist in materials. He held several obscure patents in polymers. One particular patent was highlighted later. It was for a specialized industrial coating. He sold it outright 30 years ago. The biography called it a fortuitous sale. It provided the seed of his philanthropic wealth. The buyer was a company named Kestrel Dynamics. I had never heard of this company. I noted the name carefully. The sale amount was not listed. The book then detailed his charitable foundation. It listed hospitals and research institutes he funded. The narrative was smooth and inspiring. It felt too perfect and clean. I closed the heavy book thoughtfully. I needed corporate records next. I walked to the business archives section. I searched for Kestrel Dynamics. The system produced a single filing. It was a notice of corporate dissolution. Kestrel was dissolved just 2 years later. Its assets were distributed to unnamed parties. There was no further information. This was a clear dead end. A company bought a revolutionary patent. Then it vanished from existence. This pattern felt intentionally neat. It erased a financial trail. I left the reading room quietly. The afternoon rain had lightened to a mist. I felt exposed on the busy street. I returned to my apartment. I conducted broader searches online. I found a trade journal mention. It discussed Reed's coding patent briefly. The article speculated on its value. It suggested a price in the tens of millions. That aligned with his sudden wealth. Yet the dissolving company nagged at me. Where did the patent's profits ultimately go? I needed a different approach entirely. I remembered the storage complex. The 10,000 Lakes storage complex was in Lena's notes. Her journal had a scribbled reference. I had not fully examined her journal yet. I retrieved it from my bag. I paged through her precise handwriting. She noted a unit number, 1147. She had written Kestrel 10K Lakes. The arrow suggested a connection. Perhaps Kestrel's records were stored there, or something else from that transaction. I decided to visit the facility tomorrow. The storage complex was vast and impersonal. I needed a pretext to be there. I would rent a small unit myself. This would grant me legitimate access. I could then observe Unit 1147 discreetly. This plan formed in my mind clearly. It was a logical next step. I felt the familiar prickle of investigation. It was a focused energy now. It had direction and purpose. I made a simple dinner for myself. I ate while reviewing the memo again. The Special Acquisitions Fund was a conduit. It moved money for sensitive projects. Marcus Thorne had access to it. Dr. Alastair Reed authorized its use. The hidden train provided secret transport. These pieces were aligning into a shape. The shape was still obscure in its center, but its edges were becoming defined. I washed my single plate and fork. I prepared for bed with routine actions. The normalcy of brushing my teeth felt strange. My mind was in a hidden, silent platform. My body was in a small, tiled bathroom. The disconnect was jarring but necessary. I had to maintain my outward calm. I had to appear as Alina the archivist, not Alina the investigator. The performance was crucial for safety. I understood that instinctively now. Lena's warning was a practical guide. Sleep came in fitful waves that night. I dreamed of endless corridors of storage units. Each door was labeled with a barcode. None of them had the number 1147. I wandered the concrete aisles without direction. The dream held a quiet, profound anxiety. I woke before my alarm sounded. The room was dark and still. Today I would visit the storage complex. Today I might find another piece. I dressed in casual, forgettable clothes. I drove to the 10,000 Lakes storage complex. It was a vast, impersonal place. Rows of identical garage doors stretched endlessly. The office was a small, prefabricated building. A clerk greeted me with a blank smile. I said I was researching old businesses. I asked about availability for a small unit. The clerk was happy to show me options. We walked along the endless corridors. He pointed out various unit sizes. I kept my eyes open for Unit 1147. We turned down another corridor. I saw a woman ahead of us. She was unlocking a unit door. Her posture was tense and focused. She used a key card and a physical key. The unit number was 1147. This was Lena's unit. The woman looked familiar to me. I recognized her from donor photos. She was Anya Petrova, an art restorer. She worked with several museum foundations. She was known for her exquisite skill. She was a Thorne Foundation consultant too. Anya did not see us approaching. She opened the unit door wide. Inside, I glimpsed a climate-controlled space. I saw the edge of a large, flat crate. It looked like a painting transport crate. Then she noticed our footsteps. She turned her head quickly. Her eyes met mine for a second. They widened in clear recognition. Then they flashed with pure alarm. She swiftly pulled the door shut. It locked with a loud clang. She composed her face into neutrality, but the fear had been real. She walked past us without a word. Her heels clicked sharply on the concrete. She disappeared around the corner. The storage clerk seemed oblivious. He continued his tour narration. I asked about Unit 1147's tenant. He said that information was private. He said long-term clients valued discretion. I rented the smallest available unit. It was several rows away from 1147. I needed legitimate access to the facility. This was my new foothold. I signed the paperwork calmly. I received my own key card and lock. I returned to my car and waited. I watched the facility entrance for an hour. Anya Petrova did not reappear. Her reaction troubled me deeply. She knew who I was. My presence had startled her profoundly. This was a significant power shift. I was no longer an anonymous observer. I was now a recognized element. This made my position more dangerous, but it also confirmed my path. Art restoration was part of this puzzle. I drove back to the Meridian archive. I had routine work to finish. My desk felt like an alien environment. I logged into the system. An internal message alert blinked on my screen. It was from Marcus Thorne's office. My breath caught in my throat. I opened the message with caution. It was an invitation to a meeting. Thorne requested my expertise on archival protocols. He cited a sensitive collection needing assessment. The tone was polite and professional. The meeting was set for tomorrow afternoon. This was not a coincidence. Anya must have contacted him immediately. My visit triggered this invitation. It was a strategic move. It was a way to bring me closer, or to assess what I knew. I accepted the meeting via email. My reply was brief and compliant. I would enter his domain willingly. I needed to observe him directly. After sending the email, I felt fatigue. The stress was accumulating slowly. As I packed my bag to leave, a man approached. He was Arthur Finch from accounting. He was a quiet, unassuming man. He seldom spoke to anyone directly. He placed a sealed envelope on my desk. He did not make eye contact. He said it was a misdelivered memo. Then he walked away quickly. I looked at the plain envelope. It had no identifying marks. I slipped it into my bag unopened. I left the building and went home. In my kitchen, I opened the envelope. It contained a single sheet. It was a bank account notice. The account was Special Acquisitions Fund SAF. It showed a recent deposit transaction. The deposit amount was $5 million. The source was Reed Family Trust Adjusted Grant. This was the missing $5 million. It had not vanished at all. It had moved to this shadow account. This was definitive documentary proof. Arthur Finch had just provided it. Why would he risk giving this to me? He must be part of the system, yet he was showing me its workings. This was a massive, dangerous reveal. The quiet accountant was not so meek. He was perhaps a conscience within the machine, or he was testing my intentions. I stored the bank notice with my documents. The dossier was growing thicker. The meeting with Thorne now loomed larger. I prepared by reviewing his foundation's public filings. I practiced a calm, professional demeanor. Sleep was a shallow pool that night. The next afternoon, I took the elevator. It rose to the Thorne Foundation's top floor. The headquarters were sleek and airy. Walls of glass displayed the city's skyline. Everything spoke of transparent goodness. A receptionist guided me to a conference room. Marcus Thorne entered moments later. He was as charming as his photographs. He greeted me with a warm smile. He thanked me for coming on short notice. He offered me coffee or water. I declined both politely. He began discussing a hypothetical collection. He mentioned delicate cultural artifacts. He asked about archival best practices for provenance. Provenance is an artwork's ownership history. It was a relevant question for him. I gave standard textbook answers. He nodded along thoughtfully. Then he shifted the conversation subtly. He mentioned the Special Acquisitions Fund by name. He called it a tool for sensitive charities. Some donors required absolute anonymity, he explained. The fund handled such donations. It was a necessary mechanism in philanthropy. His explanation was smooth and plausible. I nodded as if convinced, but I sensed the lie beneath his words. The fund's bank notice weighed on my mind. Its transactions were not charitable. They were movements of hidden money. I thanked him for the clarification. I said it illuminated some ledger entries. He smiled, but his eyes evaluated me. He was gauging my acceptance. The meeting concluded shortly after. He walked me to the elevator himself. He said he valued the archive's discretion. I assured him of our professional integrity. The elevator doors closed between us. I released a breath I was holding. The encounter was a delicate dance. He had acknowledged the fund to me. He had normalized its existence. This was a form of containment. He wanted me to think it was benign. I knew it was anything but that. I returned to the Meridian archive. I felt his gaze on my back, metaphorically, of course, but the feeling was pervasive. I needed to understand the art connection. Anya Petrova was the key there. I tracked a shipment through Foundation logs. I had limited access to logistics records. I found a shipment number for her atelier. It was for conservation supplies sent last week. The atelier was her restoration studio. It was located above a public gallery. I decided to see the location for myself. I drove there after work. The gallery was in a fashionable district. Her studio had a separate, private entrance. I stood across the street observing it. The entrance was a plain black door. A keypad and an intercom were beside it. It was unmarked and discreet. As I watched, a delivery van arrived. Two men unloaded a large, flat crate. It was identical to the one in storage. They took it inside the studio. The delivery was quick and efficient. The van drove away after 5 minutes. I now had a physical link. Storage unit to restoration studio. This was a tangible logistics chain. I needed to get inside that studio. I could not simply ring the bell. I needed a legitimate reason to meet Anya. I researched her publicly listed lectures. She was giving a talk next week. It was at a museum on conservation ethics. I registered to attend as a member. The lecture was a standard presentation. Anya spoke about preserving cultural heritage. She was eloquent and passionate. She took questions from the audience afterward. I waited until the crowd thinned. I approached her at the podium. I introduced myself as an archivist from Meridian. I mentioned a shared interest in provenance tracking. Her friendly demeanor froze for a microsecond. She recovered with professional grace. She suggested a private conversation might be better. We arranged to meet at her studio tomorrow. She said she could show me some techniques. It was a perfect opportunity. It was also a clear risk. She could be luring me into a trap, or she might genuinely want to talk. I had to take the chance. That night, I sorted all my collected documents. I made digital copies and stored them securely. I hid the physical copies in a new place. I was preparing for potential confrontation. Sleep was again elusive and thin. I arrived at Anya's studio at the appointed time. I pressed the intercom button. She buzzed me in without speaking. The staircase was narrow and white-walled. It led to a bright, spacious studio. North light flooded the room from large windows. It was impeccably clean and organized. Canvases and tools were arranged precisely. Anya stood in the center of the room. She wore a simple smock over her clothes. Her expression was guarded and serious. She did not offer a smile. She asked me why I was really here. I decided on a measure of honesty. I said I was following Lena's research. I said Lena had been my mentor. At Lena's name, Anya flinched. Her stern composure cracked slightly. She looked away toward the windows. She said Lena asked too many questions. She said Lena was a good woman. Then Anya fell silent for a long moment. The studio was utterly quiet. I could hear distant city sounds below. She walked to a large work table. She lifted a protective cloth from it. Beneath was an exquisite Renaissance-era portrait. I recognized the style and period instantly. It was a beautiful, haunting face. The painting was partially cleaned. Fresh in-painting work was visible. Anya touched the frame with a tender hand. Then she spoke in a low, confessional tone. She said this painting was looted during war. Its true owners were lost to history. Her job was not to restore it for return. Her job was to erase its provenance. She altered its restoration records. She created a false history of ownership. Then the painting could be sold legally. The profits funded the network. She said this with flat, drained emotion. This was her great confession. This was the core reveal. The philanthropy was a front. The real engine was art laundering. Stolen cultural heritage was the commodity. I felt a cold nausea rise in me. The scale of the betrayal was immense. I asked her who was behind it. She said Dr. Reed was the chief financier. He provided the initial capital. He still received a share of profits. Marcus Thorne managed the distribution network. The Special Acquisitions Fund was its bank. The hidden train was for secure movement. The storage units were way stations. She described a sleek, efficient operation. It had operated for over a decade. It was built on lies and stolen beauty. She said she participated out of fear. They had compromising information on her, a past mistake in her early career. They offered protection and great payment. She felt she had no escape, but Lena's investigation stirred her conscience. My appearance at the storage unit terrified her. She thought I was one of them. She thought I was there to warn her. Now she saw I was something else, a possible way out perhaps. This was a monumental power shift. I had an insider's confirmation. I did not know if I could trust her. Her guilt seemed genuine, though. Her fear was palpable in the bright room. I asked her what she wanted to do. She said she wanted it to stop, but she did not know how. She was afraid of prison. She was afraid of them. I told her I was gathering evidence. I told her about the dossier. She agreed to provide documentation. She would give me shipping manifests. She would give me restoration reports. She warned me to be extremely careful. Marcus Thorne was not a forgiving man. Dr. Reed was insulated by layers of protection. There was also the conductor to consider. I asked who the conductor was. She said she did not know a name. The conductor was the logistics coordinator. All movements were approved by this entity. Instructions came via encrypted messages. She had never met them in person. She assumed it was another executive. We parted with a tense understanding. I was now allied with a conspirator. This alliance was fragile and dangerous. I returned to my car. I felt the weight of her revelation. The beautiful painting's face stayed in my mind. It was a victim in this scheme, just like Lena had been a victim, just like the true owners were victims. I drove home through the evening traffic. My phone rang as I parked. The number was unknown to me. I answered it with caution. A woman's voice spoke calmly. She introduced herself as Detective Sarah Kells. She said she was retired from the force. She maintained a private archive of cold cases. She had been monitoring archive access logs. She noticed my repeated queries on the Reed file. She also knew of my visit to Lena. She believed Lena's death warranted a second look. She asked if we could meet discreetly. I agreed immediately. We set a meeting for a public park. It was set for the following morning. The network of truth seekers was expanding. I was not alone anymore. That thought brought a wave of relief. It was a small, brief comfort, but it was a genuine one. I made a simple dinner that night. I ate while watching the night sky. The city lights glowed steadily outside. They hid so many secrets and stories. Mine was just one thread among millions, yet it felt terribly significant in that moment. I prepared for my meeting with Kells. I selected a few documents to show her. The bank notice, the memo, the map. I did not bring Anya's name yet. That was too sensitive to share immediately. I needed to gauge Kells' trustworthiness first. Though she reached out to me, caution was wise. Lena's fate was a stark reminder. Trust was a precious and dangerous commodity. I slept a little better that night. The morning was cool and bright. I walked to the designated park. It was a small, well-kept green space. Children played on a distant swing set. I found the bench she described. Detective Sarah Kells was already there. She was an older woman with sharp eyes. Her posture was relaxed but observant. She carried a simple leather satchel. We spoke in low, measured tones. She confirmed her retired status. She specialized in financial and art crimes. She had a private file on the Thorne Foundation. It was circumstantial but suggestive. She believed Lena's death was not fully natural. The timing was too convenient. Lena asked questions before her illness. Kells had no concrete proof of foul play, but her instinct sounded a deep alarm. She shared this theory with me carefully. It was a horrific new possibility. I felt a fresh wave of grief. It mixed with a rising anger. I told Kells about my discoveries. I mentioned the ledger discrepancy. I described the hidden train. I told her about my meeting with Anya. I did not give Anya's name yet. Kells listened without interruption. Her face remained impassively calm. When I finished, she nodded slowly. She said my findings aligned with her suspicions. She called it a philanthropic shell game. The stolen art was the hidden ball. She opened her satchel then. She handed me a thin manila folder. Inside was an old, scanned document. It was an HR memo from Meridian. It concerned Lena's early retirement package. The memo cited health reasons for her departure. It was signed by a senior administrator. That administrator later took a job at Thorne. The connection was subtle but clear. They had pushed Lena out. They neutralized her investigative position. This document confirmed a quiet power play. It was a corporate silencing. I added it to my mental dossier. Kells said we needed more than documents. We needed an unbroken chain of evidence. We also needed a credible witness. Anya Petrova was compromised by her participation. Arthur Finch was an unknown variable. His motives for helping were unclear. Kells suggested we focus on finances. The money trail was the most convincing. It was also the most dangerous to follow. She gave me a secure USB drive. It contained a forensic accounting template. It was a spreadsheet for complex transactions. I could input data from the bank notice. I took the drive and thanked her. We agreed to communicate through secure channels. We would meet rarely and in public. I left the park feeling both heavier and lighter. I had an ally with experience. The path forward was still shrouded, but I was no longer walking it alone. I returned to my apartment. I inserted the USB drive into my laptop. The spreadsheet program opened. It was a sophisticated but user-friendly tool. I began entering the data from the bank notice. I listed the $5 million deposit. I labeled its source as the Reed Trust. I then reviewed Thorne's public tax filings. I cross-referenced grants they claimed to have made. Several large grants to museums stood out. These museums had contracts with Anya's atelier. The money moved from donor to foundation to museum. Then it went to restoration services. But the art restored was not the museum's. It was a shadow inventory. The spreadsheet revealed a circular flow. It legitimized illicit spending. Charitable funds paid for the laundering service itself. The elegance of it was appalling. It used goodness to hide theft. I worked for several hours on this. A pattern of shell entities emerged. They were named after birds: kestrel, wren, hawk. They were all dissolved after brief existences. They existed only to move money and assets. I saved the file under encryption. My doorbell rang suddenly. The sound was sharp and unexpected. I closed my laptop lid swiftly. I walked to the door and looked out. Arthur Finch stood in my hallway. He looked even more nervous than before. I opened the door a few inches. He did not step forward to enter. He handed me another plain envelope. His hand trembled slightly. He said the words "full ledger" quietly. Then he turned and walked away. I locked the door behind me. I opened the envelope with care. It contained a printed spreadsheet. It was the complete internal ledger for the SAF. It spanned 8 years of transactions. Each entry had a date, amount, and code. The total sums were staggering. Hundreds of millions had flowed through. The final page had code definitions. Code art meant acquisition and restoration. Code log was for logistics and transport. Code disp was for final sale. The codes created a clear map. This was the master document. This was the whole story in numbers. Arthur Finch had handed me the accounts. His risk was unimaginable. I immediately scanned every page. I uploaded the scans to a secure cloud. I hid the physical pages in a new location. This ledger changed everything. It was the key to unlock all doors, but it raised a pressing question. Why did Arthur Finch do this? He was the system's bookkeeper. His silence was bought and insured. I needed to understand his motive. I sent a secure message to Kells. I told her about the ledger delivery. She replied with brief caution. She said this could be a trap. The ledger might contain fabricated data, or it might be bait to see what I did. I needed to verify a sample transaction. I focused on a single art-coded entry. It was from 2 years prior. The amount was 1.2 million. The memo said Portrait Flemish School, ref. 889. I cross-referenced this with Anya's records. I would need to ask her for a match. I contacted her through our prearranged method. It was a secure email service. I asked her about reference number 889. Her reply came an hour later. She confirmed she worked on that painting. She provided its photograph from her files. It was a different Flemish portrait. It matched the ledger description perfectly. This was verification. The ledger was authentic. Arthur Finch had given me the real thing. My next task was tracing the final sale. The ledger listed a disp entry later. The sale price was 4.5 million. The buyer was Private Collection Geneva. The profit was immense and untaxed. The network's profitability was now clear. It was a high-reward, low-risk business. It operated under a cloak of virtue. I spent days correlating data. I linked entries to storage logs. I connected them to shipping manifests from Anya. The chain of custody became visible. It was a meticulous criminal operation. I compiled a summary report for Kells. She reviewed it and was impressed. She said it was time for authorities, but we had to choose the right authority. Not every agency was free from influence. We needed a specific financial crimes unit. She had contacts from her old career. She would make discreet inquiries. My role was to stay safe and normal. I continued my work at Meridian Archive. I acted as though nothing had changed. It was an exhausting performance of routine. I filed papers and answered emails. Marcus Thorne invited me to another event. It was a small donor appreciation gathering. It was held at the Foundation's headquarters. I felt I had to attend. The event was elegant and understated. Wine and canapés were served. Thorne gave a short speech about impact. I mingled with other guests politely. Thorne approached me during the reception. He asked how my archival work was progressing. His tone was light and friendly. I said it was progressing smoothly. I thanked him again for his earlier explanation. He smiled and said he was glad to help. Then his expression grew subtly serious. He mentioned archives rely on trust. He said some histories are better left archived. Not destroyed, just left undisturbed. It was a veiled warning. I nodded as if in agreement. I said preservation was indeed about choices. He held my gaze for a second too long. Then he was called away by another donor. The interaction left me chilled. He knew I was digging. He was telling me to stop. The power shift was implicit. He held all the visible power there. But I held the hidden ledger. That was my only counterweight. I left the event as early as possible. I drove home with my hands tight. I checked my apartment for tampering. It appeared normal and untouched, but a feeling of violation persisted. I decided to move the physical documents. I used a commercial safety deposit box. It was in a different part of the city. I felt slightly better after that. Kells contacted me the next day. She had spoken to a former colleague. This colleague worked for a federal task force. They were interested in our evidence. They wanted to see a preliminary package. We prepared a sanitized version of the dossier. It contained the bank notice and HR memo. It included the ledger sample. It had the verified chain for the portrait. We omitted Anya's and Arthur's names. We referred to confidential sources. Kells submitted the package securely. We then entered a period of waiting. This was the hardest part. Life had to appear normal. Everything was poised to rupture. Anya sent me a message during this time. She was becoming increasingly anxious. She felt watched at her studio. A routine insurance inspection was scheduled. It felt unusually thorough to her. She feared they were closing in. I advised her to stay calm. I told her we had made progress. I could not reveal official contact yet. It was too risky for all of us. She agreed, but her fear was palpable. Arthur Finch sent no further messages. I saw him once at the archive. He walked past my desk without a glance. He looked pale and thinner. The stress was wearing on him visibly. I felt a surge of guilt. I had pulled him into this phase. He had chosen to give me the ledger, but my investigation forced his hand. I was responsible for his safety now. The weight of responsibilities felt immense. I took long walks to clear my mind. 1 week after submission, Kells called. Her contact was impressed by the evidence. They saw a major laundering scheme, but they needed a witness who would testify. Documentary evidence was strong. A witness was stronger. They needed someone inside the operation. This meant either Anya or Arthur, or both. We had to secure their cooperation officially. This would expose them to legal risk, but it could offer protection. I arranged a meeting with Anya. We met at the botanical garden again. She wore large sunglasses and a hat. We walked slowly among the ferns. I explained the situation honestly. I told her authorities were now engaged. Her testimony would be crucial. It could mean immunity or reduced sentence. She listened in total silence. She stopped and watched a water feature. She said she expected this day. She agreed to cooperate, but she had one condition. She wanted the recovered artworks to go home. She wanted their true provenance restored. I said I would advocate for that. It was the right outcome. She nodded, seeming a little relieved. The burden of her secret was shifting. Next was Arthur Finch. He was a more difficult prospect. He was a man deeply afraid of attention. Kells suggested she approach him first. She had a professional demeanor. It might reassure him. She contacted him as a financial auditor. She referenced the ledger he provided. She offered a meeting in a neutral office. He agreed, to our surprise. They met in a bland conference room. It was at a law library. Kells revealed her true identity and intent. She said authorities could protect him. He broke down quietly at the table. He said he kept the ledger for insurance. He never intended to use it. He just wanted a possible way out. He had a family to protect. Kells assured him witness protection was possible. His family could be kept safe. He agreed to provide a formal statement. He would verify the ledger under oath. With 2 witnesses secured, the case solidified. The federal task force began a formal investigation. It was a quiet, behind-the-scenes operation. No one was arrested immediately. The goal was understanding the entire network first. They especially wanted Dr. Alastair Reed. His public persona was spotless. Piercing that armor required absolute proof. My research into his patent became relevant again. The task force had resources I lacked. They traced Kestrel Dynamics' dissolution. Its assets went to another shell company. That company was owned by a trust. The trust was in Luxembourg. The trust's beneficiary was a Reed Foundation. It was a classic round trip. Reed sold his patent to his own company. The company paid him with financed money. That money became his philanthropic capital. It was wealth generation from fiction. The patent's technology was then licensed legitimately. The profits were enormous and clean. The initial seed money was a fraud. This was the foundational lie. Everything else was built upon it. The task force unraveled this over days. They provided me with a summary document. It was a corporate flowchart of complexity. It showed movement of money and assets. At the center was Dr. Alastair Reed. His hands appeared completely clean. He was insulated by legal entities. But the flowchart was a map of guilt. It was the document that could topple him. I added it to the master dossier. The case was now nearly complete. The final piece was the conductor, who managed the daily logistics. The encrypted messages led to a server. The task force tracked its location. It was in a nondescript data center. The server was leased by a holding company. That company was linked to Thorn. The conductor was not a person. It was a sophisticated logistics AI. It was a piece of software. It managed schedules and shipments. It coordinated encrypted communications. It even coordinated the hidden train's usage. This reveal was oddly unsettling. The mastermind was an algorithm. It was created by someone, of course, but it operated with chilling efficiency. It had no conscience to appeal to. It was a perfect, silent crime manager. The task force planned to seize the server. It would be an evidentiary goldmine. It would contain records of every transaction, every message and shipment and train trip. They scheduled the seizure for a weekend. It would be a coordinated operation. They would also secure the storage unit. They would secure the atelier. They wanted all evidence collected simultaneously. This would prevent record destruction. I was told to stay far away. My role was now essentially over. I had provided the thread they pulled. I waited at home that Saturday. I tried to read a book but failed. I watched the clock move slowly. Kells called me that evening. Her voice was tired but satisfied. The operations were successful. The server was seized without incident. The storage unit was opened with a warrant. It contained 12 crated paintings. The atelier was secured. Anya was taken into protective custody. Arthur Finch was already in a safe location. No public announcements were made. It was a quiet, tactical victory. The network was now severed at its roots. I asked about Marcus Thorne and Dr. Reed. They were not arrested that day. The task force built an ironclad case. They wanted every document in order first. They expected voluntary interviews soon. The targets would come in thinking they could talk. They would be presented with evidence instead. It was a strategic approach. It avoided dramatic public scenes. I understood the logic, but I felt a strange anticlimax. The silent war ended silently. There would be no fireworks, just the closing of files and indictments. I felt a profound exhaustion settle. The adrenaline that sustained me drained away. I was left with a hollow quiet. I made a cup of tea. I sat in my dark living room. I thought about Lena. I hoped this outcome pleased her. I hoped it brought her peace. The week after the seizures passed quietly. I returned to my routine at the archive. The silence there felt different now. It was no longer menacing or watchful. It was simply the absence of sound. My supervisor never mentioned my flagged read note. The discrepancy remained officially unaddressed. This no longer troubled me. I knew the truth moved elsewhere now. I performed my duties with mechanical precision. Marcus Thorne resigned from his foundation. The press release cited a personal sabbatical. It mentioned planned humanitarian travel. The article in the business section was brief. There was no hint of scandal. I read it at my desk calmly. This was the first consequence. It was a gentle, controlled landing for him, but it was only the public first step. The Thorne Foundation announced a restructuring. It would merge with a larger charity. Its operations would be fully audited. The Special Acquisitions Fund was quietly dissolved. Its remaining assets were frozen by court order. This was not public knowledge. I learned it from an update from Kells. The financial mechanism was now disabled. The network's engine was off. Dr. Alistair Reed gave no public statement. His foundation announced a pause on new grants. They cited a comprehensive internal review. His public face remained one of benevolence. I knew pressure built behind the scenes. His lawyers were certainly in constant meetings. The task force presented evidence methodically. They negotiated from a position of strength. The calm was strategic, not peaceful. I received a formal interview request. It was from the federal task force attorneys. They wanted my full testimony on record. They scheduled it at a neutral office. I arrived early and sat in a plain room. A kind female attorney took my statement. I recounted everything from the ledger discrepancy forward. I described finding Lena's key and map. I detailed my ride on the 7:15 train. I named the documents I collected. The interview lasted several hours. It was thorough and tiring. They were interested in Arthur Finch. They wanted to confirm his state of mind. I described his nervous demeanor accurately. I stated he seemed motivated by conscience. The attorney nodded and made careful notes. She assured me my cooperation was invaluable. She said I acted with courage and ethics. I did not feel courageous. I had simply followed a trail of paper. It was a path laid down by Lena. I was just the next archivist in the chain. After the interview, I felt strangely empty. A chapter of my life was closing. I needed to see Lena's lake house one final time. I drove there on a cloudy afternoon. The for sale sign was in the yard. The house looked empty and still. I used the key she had given me. The realtor had not changed the locks. I stepped inside into cool, still air. The furniture was gone except for covered shapes. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows. I walked to the room with the large window. I sat on the bare floor where we talked. I remembered her handing me the brass key. I finally understood the weight she passed. I explored the empty rooms slowly. In a hall closet, I found a remaining box. It was labeled Research Personal. I opened the cardboard flaps. Inside were several handwritten journals. They were Lena's private retirement records. This was her final, unspoken gift. I took the box to my car. I drove home with a sense of duty. That evening, I began to read her journals. Her handwriting was precise and calm. The early entries discussed her forced retirement. She expressed confusion and then dawning suspicion. She had questioned a shipment log for artwork. Her inquiries met polite resistance. Then came a formal performance review. It cited overreach and breach of confidentiality. She was offered a generous severance package. She understood the threat implied. She took the deal to protect her pension, but she continued her research privately. She used old contacts and access codes. She mapped the hidden train route first. She discovered the platform through old blueprints. She identified Marcus Thorne as a user. She connected him to anomalous Reed donations. Her journal detailed her growing fear. She wrote about being followed once. She described a sense of being watched. The later entries were during her illness. She suspected her diagnosis was coincidental, but she could not rule out possibilities. This was heartbreaking to read. She felt alone and pursued. Her final entry was one sentence. It said, "I have left the key for a leaner. She sees the patterns in the silence." I closed the journal gently. Tears finally came, quiet and relieving. Lena had not died peacefully. She died in a state of vigilant fear. But she also died with a thread of hope. She hoped I would pick up the thread. I had. The justice unfolding was her vindication. I made copies of relevant journal pages. I provided them to the task force. They were powerful evidence of the network's reach. They showed the human cost. Lena was their first documented victim. Anya Petrova entered a cooperation agreement. She provided a full inventory of artworks. She gave her restoration records. The false provenances were meticulously documented. This allowed investigators to reverse the process. They could trace art back to origins. Many pieces were looted from conflict zones. Their rightful owners were difficult to find. But the process of restitution had begun. Anya was placed in a safe house. She would likely avoid prison time. She would have a long probation period. She would assist in restitution work. This seemed a fitting consequence. Her skills would repair damage she enabled. I received one message from her through Kells. It simply said, "Thank you for the sunlight." Arthur Finch's fate was similar. He secured full immunity for his testimony. His family was relocated under protection. He would start a new life with a new identity. His meticulous bookkeeping doomed the network. It was also his ticket to freedom. I never saw or heard from him again. I hoped he found peace away from numbers. I hoped his family understood. The task force moved to the final phase. They presented Dr. Alastair Reed with a choice. He could face a public indictment, or he could surrender his entire fortune. He could provide a full confession. This allowed a quiet, non-prosecution agreement. His public reputation would remain technically intact. He would live in obscurity, not prison. It was pragmatic justice. He chose the latter option. The transfer of his assets was staggering. Hundreds of millions moved to a new fund. Its purpose was to return stolen art. It would compensate families where art was lost. The fund was administered by an international board. It had strict oversight and transparency. It was the opposite of the Special Acquisitions Fund. Marcus Thorne was not offered the same deal. His role was more actively criminal. He was charged with multiple counts of fraud. He was charged with conspiracy and laundering. He pleaded guilty in a sealed courtroom. He received a substantial prison sentence. It would be in a low-security facility. His public story remained the sabbatical narrative. His downfall was invisible to the world. This felt unsatisfying but effective. The night metro route was officially discontinued. The transit authority cited low ridership. The hidden platform was sealed permanently. Gate 14 reopened as a coffee kiosk. The space was flooded with light. No one remembered its secret purpose. The conductor AI server was dismantled. Its algorithms were repurposed for legitimate research. The tool was neutralized. The Meridian archive underwent its own quiet change. The board commissioned an ethics review. New protocols for donor anonymity were established. My supervisor took an unexpected early retirement. I was offered a new position. It was titled Archival Integrity Liaison. My role ensured transparency met privacy ethically. I accepted the offer after thought. It felt like honoring Lena's work. I returned to a normal rhythm of days. I took the train to work in daylight. I watched the city pass by the window. The sunlight felt clean and ordinary. One afternoon, Kells invited me to her home. She lived in a cozy, book-filled apartment. We shared a pot of tea. She showed me her wall of solved cases. Lena's name was on a small, discreet card. It was marked Resolved. We did not celebrate. We simply acknowledged the closure. She asked me what I would do now. I said I would continue as an archivist. But my definition of the job changed forever. Archives were not passive repositories. They were living records of truth. My duty was to truth, not just order. She smiled and said Lena would be proud. That meant more than any commendation. I left her apartment as evening fell. The city lights came on one by one. I walked for a while through peaceful streets. I thought about the hidden world that existed. It was built on greed and theft, but it was uncovered by curiosity and care. It was defeated by documents and quiet courage. The victory was not in headlines. It was in restored silence. It was in paintings returning home. It was in the balance sheet matching up. I arrived at my apartment building. I checked my mailbox from habit. Among bills was a formal envelope. It was from the restitution fund. I opened it upstairs at my kitchen table. It was a letter of acknowledgement. It thanked me for my role. It stated my anonymity would be preserved. It was signed by the board chair. I filed the letter with my documents. My personal dossier was now complete. It told a full story from discrepancy to resolution. I placed it in my small safe. It was not for publication. It was a private archive. I sat down at my desk. I opened a fresh, blank ledger book. Its pages were empty and promising. I picked up a pen. I wrote the date at the top. I began cataloging a new collection, a personal one. It was a list of books I wanted to read. The simple act felt profoundly meaningful. I was recording something normal and good. I was building a history of my choosing. The pen moved smoothly across paper. The silence in my apartment was deep. It was no longer filled with ghosts. It was full of potential. It was the sound of a story ending. It was also the sound of a story beginning. I wrote until my hand grew tired. I looked out the window at the night sky. A few stars were visible between buildings. I thought of Lena again. I hoped she found peace in some other place. I hoped restored art brought solace to someone. The network was dismantled. Participants faced consequences. The system was corrected, not shattered. It was a calm resolution. It was enough. I closed the ledger book. I turned off the light. The room was dark and still. The new role at the archive began slowly. My office was smaller but had a window. Morning light fell across a clean desk. I reviewed new donor transparency protocols. They were sensible and robust. They allowed privacy but prevented obscurity. It was a careful, ethical balance. I felt quiet pride in this work. It was a direct result of what we uncovered. Good was woven from corruption. Weeks passed in a rhythm of normalcy. I attended meetings and wrote reports. I approved access requests and filed documents. The mundane nature was a gift. I feared a lasting paranoia, but it faded like a distant echo. One afternoon, a package arrived at my office. It was a flat, rectangular parcel. It bore no return address. My heart beat faster for a moment. I carefully cut the tape. Inside was a hardcover book. It was a bound volume of art catalogs. A note card was slipped between pages. The handwriting was elegant and unfamiliar. It read, "For your quiet collection, a friend." I understood the sender immediately. It was Anya Petrova. This was her final communication. The book featured Flemish portraiture. I opened it to a bookmarked page. There was the painting from her studio. The haunting face stared back. The caption listed its true provenance now. It named the family who lost it. A footnote stated it was pending repatriation. This was her gift of closure to me. She showed me redemption was real. I placed the book on my office shelf. It stood among policy manuals. It was a beautiful, silent reminder. It spoke of loss and eventual return. It spoke of salvaged good. I received no other messages from that world. Kells and I met for lunch monthly. We discussed ordinary things mostly. Books, the weather, her garden. We rarely spoke of the case. It was a closed chapter for us both. She showed me photos of her grandchildren. Her life was full and calm. My life found its own new shape. I joined a community choir on weekends. I sang with others in harmony. The vibration of song felt healing. One Tuesday, I was working late. The building was empty and still. I organized a new collection of letters. They were from a 19th century botanist. They described his travels and discoveries. The words were gentle and precise. I felt affinity for his methodical work. He sought to categorize the natural world. I sought to categorize human history. Both were acts of preservation. My computer chimed with a calendar alert. It was for the annual archive gala. It was a fundraising event I usually avoided. This year, my presence was requested. I sighed and accepted the inevitable. I would make an appearance and leave. The event was in the archive's grand hall. Crystal chandeliers glowed above the crowd. Guests wore fine suits and dresses. I wore a simple black pantsuit. I circulated with a glass of sparkling water. I recognized many faces from donor plaques. They were visible pillars of philanthropy. I wondered how many were entirely genuine. I knew most had to be the actions of a few poisoned perception. I worked to restore my own faith. A man approached me with a polite smile. He introduced himself as a board member. He thanked me for my work on protocols. He said integrity was the archive's greatest asset. I thanked him for his kind words. The conversation was pleasant and superficial. It felt like a normal interaction. It was a small victory for my spirit. I stayed for the brief dinner and speech. Then I collected my coat and slipped out. The night air was cool and refreshing. I decided to walk home through parks. The path was lit by soft lamps. I passed a familiar metro entrance. The sign for the 7:15 train still hung, but the schedule showed it ended earlier. The hidden extension was truly gone. I felt no urge to descend. My journey on that line was complete. I continued my walk under trees. My apartment welcomed me with familiar quiet. I changed into soft clothes. I made a cup of herbal tea. I sat in my armchair with a novel. This was my life now. It was simple and it was mine. It was not defined by a secret chase. It was defined by quiet evenings. It was defined by small joys. The following month, I took a short vacation. I visited a coastal town I had never seen. I walked on windy beaches and collected shells. I did not think about ledgers. I thought about the color of the sea. I thought about the taste of salt air. I let the vast horizon empty my mind. I returned to work feeling renewed. My inbox contained a routine memo. It was a notification from the restitution fund. It was a quarterly summary report. I opened it with professional interest. The report listed 17 artworks returned. It detailed the families who received them. It included photographs of reunions. Some faces were wet with tears of joy. Others showed solemn, profound gratitude. These images were powerful documents. They were the final, beautiful reveals. They were the answer to all hidden codes. They were the purpose of the pursuit. I printed one photograph carefully. It showed an elderly woman touching a painting. Her hand hovered over the canvas with reverence. I placed it in a simple frame on my desk. It faced me as I worked each day. It reminded me of tangible good. It grounded my tasks in human meaning. Time moved forward in its steady way. Seasons changed outside my window. Leaves turned gold and then fell. Winter brought a blanket of silent snow. Then spring arrived with gentle rain. A full year had passed since Lena's death. I visited her gravesite on the anniversary. I brought a single white lily. I stood there in the quiet cemetery. I told her silently it was finished. I told her the balance was restored. I felt no profound spiritual response, just the wind in trees and birdsong. It was enough. Peace is often plain and simple. I drove back to the city feeling light. I stopped at the botanical garden. The ferns were lush and green. The water feature trickled its constant song. I sat for a moment on the same bench. I felt no sadness, only completion. My work at the archive continued to evolve. I was asked to train new archivists in ethics. I developed a seminar on provenance. I used anonymized examples from our experience. I never named names or foundations. I spoke about patterns and principles. The students were young and idealistic. They asked sharp, insightful questions. Their engagement gave me great hope. The next generation would be better guardians. One student named Chloe stayed after class. She asked about the emotional weight of work. She asked how to stay steady uncovering truths. I considered her question carefully. I said the archive is a vessel, not a judge. Our duty is to ensure the vessel is clean. Judgment belongs to history and justice. Our strength comes from fidelity to the record. She nodded, seeming to understand. I realized I was now the mentor. I had stepped into Lena's role naturally. This felt like the most fitting tribute. I was passing on lessons she taught me. I was adding lessons from my own path. The cycle of knowledge was continuing. It was continuing in light, not shadows. After the seminar, I returned to my office. The photograph of the woman greeted me. I smiled at it for the first time. I allowed a sense of accomplishment. It was a modest, humble feeling. It did not swell into pride. It was a quiet acknowledgement of work done. I finished my tasks for the day. I shut down my computer and tidied my desk. I put on my coat and walked to the elevator. The archive was silent in the evening. The security guard waved a friendly goodbye. I stepped out into soft twilight. I decided to walk to a new bookstore. It had opened recently in my neighborhood. I browsed shelves without a specific goal. I selected a novel with a beautiful cover. I paid for it and continued my walk home. I passed a cafe with outdoor seating. I saw a man reading a newspaper at a table. He was Marcus Thorne. He looked older and less polished. He wore simple, casual clothing. He was alone, staring into middle distance. He did not see me. I did not stop walking. I felt no anger, fear, or pity. I felt nothing but mild recognition. He was a man in a cafe. His story and mine were no longer entangled. The power shifts were all settled. Consequences were his to live with now. I kept walking until I reached my building. I climbed the stairs to my apartment. I made a simple dinner of soup and bread. I ate while reading my new book. The story was engaging and well written. It transported me to another place. This was the pleasure of a normal life, the ability to be absorbed in fiction, the safety to let the real world fade. After dinner, I washed my bowl and spoon. I looked at city lights from my window. They twinkled like a field of steady stars. I thought about the woman I was a year ago. That woman was tense and haunted. She saw secrets in every shadow. She carried a key like a shard of ice. That woman did what she needed to do. She was brave when required. But she was not built for lasting war. I was glad to have known her. I was glad to have been her, and I was glad to let her rest now. The present woman made a cup of tea. She watered her small collection of houseplants. She wrote a letter to an old friend. She prepared clothes for the next workday. She performed rituals with quiet contentment. They were markers of a peaceful life. They were evidence of hard-won calm. Later, in bed, I listened to night sounds. A distant siren, the hum of the refrigerator. These were sounds of an ordinary world. I slept deeply and without dreams. Morning arrived with clear, sunny light. I dressed and had my breakfast. I walked to the metro station for my commute. The platform was crowded with everyday people. They were tired, hopeful, busy, and calm. They lived their own complex stories. The train arrived with a rush of warm air. I boarded and found a seat by the window. The train moved forward into the tunnel. We traveled the published, familiar route. We stopped at each expected station. People embarked and disembarked in steady streams. I watched the mosaic of humanity. I felt part of it, anonymous and connected. The train emerged into daylight. The sun was bright on glass towers. The city looked clean and full of possibility. It held hidden histories and open futures. It held my small, steady life within it. The train arrived at my stop. I stepped onto the platform with others. I ascended the escalator to street level. The archive building stood a block away. Its glass facade reflected blue sky. It held truths and lies, order and chaos. It was my place of work and purpose. I entered through the rotating doors. Cool, quiet air welcomed me in the lobby. The security guard nodded with a smile. I walked to the elevator, then to my office. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Morning sun lit dust motes in the air. I hung my coat on my chair. I turned on my computer. I looked at the framed photograph on my desk. The woman's hand almost touched the canvas. The connection was about to be made. I felt that connection in my own heart. It was a connection to something larger. It was a thread in a tapestry of making things right. I opened my blank ledger for the day. I wrote the date at the top of a fresh page. I began listing the day's tasks and appointments. The pen moved smoothly. The words were clear and purposeful. This was my document. This was my story now. It was a story of quiet mornings. It was a story of methodical work. It was a story of preserving truth. It was a story of fostering good. It was a story with a calm rhythm. It was enough. It was more than enough. Summer arrived with a gentle warmth. My life settled into a cherished rhythm. Work, choir, weekend walks, and quiet reading. This was the durable peace I wanted. The restitution funds reports kept arriving quarterly. They were now addressed to my professional title. I reviewed them as part of my oversight duties. The number of returned artworks grew steadily. Each success felt like a silent victory. One report included a specific letter of thanks. It was from the grandson of a painting's owner. He described his grandmother's emotional reunion. The portrait was lost during war. She believed it destroyed forever. Its return healed a deep, old wound. He thanked the fund's anonymous facilitators. I printed this letter carefully. I placed it in my personal dossier. It was the perfect final document. I closed that dossier folder for the last time. I placed it in my safety deposit box. I would likely not open it for years. It was a history preserved, not a living manual. My present required no references to that past. I focused on the new archivists I mentored. Chloe, the bright student, became my assistant. She showed brilliant pattern recognition. She possessed a strong ethical compass, too. I encouraged her to trust that compass always. She asked me once about my greatest lesson. I told her it was about silence between entries. The blank space in a ledger holds meaning. It can be an error or omission. It can be a deliberate hiding spot. Our job is to understand that silence is quality. We must decide if it is innocent or if it is pregnant with secrets. She wrote this down in her notebook. I smiled at her earnestness. It was a reflection of my younger self, but she started her journey in a clearer time. The reforms at Meridian were firmly in place. Donor agreements had stringent transparency clauses. The special acquisitions model was explicitly forbidden. Our new protocols became an industry standard. Other archives requested copies for their policies. I traveled to a conference to present them. It was my first public speaking about the work. I stood at a podium in a large room. I saw rows of faces looking back. They were archivists and nonprofit directors. I spoke about structural integrity and record keeping. I never mentioned the specific inspiring case. I spoke in principles and best practices. The audience asked thoughtful, technical questions. The session was a clear success. Afterwards, an older man approached me. He was a director from a European archive. He thanked me for the practical framework. He said they faced similar ambiguities with donors. He was glad to see the issue addressed clearly. We shook hands and he moved on. His comment confirmed a sad truth. Our situation was not unique. Shadow networks likely existed in many places, but the tools to combat them were sharper now. I returned home from the trip tired but satisfied. My apartment was exactly as I left it. It was a sanctuary of my own making. I watered my plants and unpacked my suitcase. The next morning, I arrived at the archive early. I wanted to sort a new donation of letters. They were from a mid-century poet. Her handwriting was a wild, beautiful scrawl. Deciphering it was a joyful challenge. It required all my focus. I spent the morning immersed in her lyrical world. She wrote about love and landscapes with passion. Her words were a tonic for my logical mind. I transcribed fragments that moved me. This was the pure heart of archival work. It was preserving a voice that would fade. It had nothing to do with crime or justice. It was about beauty and memory. It was a perfect counterbalance to my past year. At lunch, I walked to a small nearby park. I ate a sandwich on a sunny bench. I watched pigeons coo and strut on the path. A young couple pushed a stroller slowly past. Their conversation was a soft murmur of contentment. The ordinary poetry of life was all around. I had learned to see it again. I had learned to appreciate its profound value. I finished my lunch and walked back to work. The afternoon passed in the same pleasant immersion. Near the end of the day, Chloe knocked. She looked slightly concerned. She said a man asked for me at the front desk. He did not have an appointment. He refused to give his name. He said he was an old friend of Lena's. I felt a small trickle of alarm, but I told Chloe to send him in. I needed to face whatever this was. A few minutes later, the man appeared. He was elderly with a kind, weathered face. He wore a simple corduroy jacket. He held a battered leather satchel. He introduced himself as Henry. He said he and Lena were friends in graduate school. They lost touch over the decades. He only recently learned of her passing. He came to the city to see her lake house. The realtor told him it was sold. He wanted any personal effects she might have left. His request seemed genuine and gentle. I asked him to sit down. I offered him a cup of water. He accepted it gratefully. I told him I had some of her journals. They were mostly professional notes. I asked what his connection to her was. He smiled a distant, sad smile. He said he was probably her first crush. He said she was the smartest person he ever knew. He always hoped she wrote a great work. I told him she wrote something important. It just wasn't a published book. It was a trail of truth correcting a wrong. He nodded as if this made perfect sense. He said that was a fitting legacy for her. He did not ask for details. I did not offer them. He asked for one small thing. A book or photograph of hers would suffice. I thought for a moment. I opened my desk drawer. I kept Lena's old staff badge there. It was the one from the locked drawer. I held it for a moment. Then I offered it to him. He took it and looked at her young photo. His eyes grew moist. He said thank you and placed it carefully in his pocket. He stood to leave. He said he was glad she had a friend like me. Then he walked out of my office slowly. I never saw Henry again. The encounter left me strangely uplifted. It was a reminder Lena had a full life. It was not solely defined by investigation. She was a person with friends and crushes. She had been loved. This knowledge was a final gift. It rounded her memory into a whole person. I went home that evening feeling light. I called my mother for a long chat. I told her about my conference trip. I did not mention Henry or Lena. We talked about recipes and family gossip. This was the fabric of a normal life. It was woven from small, warm connections. The next weekend, I took a day trip. I visited a famous public garden 2 hours away. I wandered for hours among roses. I took photographs of intricate flower blossoms. I ate ice cream from a small kiosk. I sat by a reflecting pool and existed. The sun warmed my skin. The breeze was sweet. On the drive back, I played favorite music loudly. I sang along with every word. I felt a surge of uncomplicated happiness. It was happiness earned through difficulty. It was therefore more precious and deeply felt. I returned to my apartment as the sun set. I uploaded flower photos to my computer. I selected one of a perfect, dew-covered rose. I had it printed and framed for my office. It was a new document of beauty. Monday brought a surprise at work. The archive director called me into her office. She offered me a promotion. It was Deputy Director of Archival Integrity. It meant a larger office. It meant more responsibility. It also meant less hands-on work with collections. I thanked her for the confidence. I asked for a few days to consider. She agreed graciously. I spent the week weighing the decision. I loved tangible work with documents. I loved the smell of old paper. A management role would distance me from that, but it would let me shape the entire culture. I could embed lessons into the institution's bones. I could protect future archivists from similar battles. It was a different kind of preservation. It preserved the integrity of the process itself. I discussed it with Kells over lunch. She listened in her wise, quiet way. She said I had a talent for seeing systems. She said my skills could have broader impact, but I must follow my own pace. If the desk job suffocated my spirit, I should decline. I thought about her words deeply. I thought about Lena's isolated pursuit of truth. She had no institutional support. I could help build that support for others. That felt like a meaningful continuation. At week's end, I accepted the promotion. The director was delighted. Chloe was happy but sad to lose me. I assured her we would work together closely. My transition took place over a month. I trained my replacement in my old duties. It was a smooth and orderly process. My last day as a hands-on archivist arrived. I finished cataloging the poet's letters. I wrote a final summary note for the file. I closed the folder and placed it in its box. I wheeled the cart to the secure storage room. I found its designated shelf and slid the box in. It joined centuries of other waiting stories. I stood in the cool, silent room for a moment. I said a silent goodbye to this career part. Then I turned off the light and closed the door. The following Monday, I moved into my new office. It was larger with 2 windows. I brought my framed photograph and rose picture. I brought a few favorite reference books. The rest of the space was clean and empty. It was a blank slate, like a new ledger page. I sat at my new desk and looked out. The view was of rooftops and sky. My first task was drafting a 5-year integrity plan. It was a document outlining proactive audits. It outlined training and vigilance. It was a blueprint for transparency. I worked on it with solemn purpose. I incorporated the principle of understanding the silence. I wrote about the duty to question neatness. I wrote about the courage to flag discrepancies. I cited general examples, not specific ones. The document was strong and clear. I submitted it to the director for review. She approved it with only minor edits. We scheduled a full staff presentation for its launch. The day of the presentation, I felt nervous. I stood before the entire archive staff. I saw familiar faces and many new ones. I began speaking about our core mission. I spoke about trust as our most valuable asset. I outlined the new plan's components. The room was attentive and receptive. During the Q&A, a junior archivist raised his hand. He asked how to handle donor pressure. What if a donor insisted on total anonymity? I answered according to our new protocol. Anonymity is permitted, but verification is not optional. A third-party auditor must confirm funds' legality. We must never accept coercive silence. He nodded, seemingly satisfied. The presentation ended with respectful applause. It was a successful institutional shift. I felt I had honored Lena's struggle. I helped build a system that would have protected her. It would have deterred the corrupt network from starting. This was the most profound form of prevention. After work, I treated myself to a nice dinner. I went to a small Italian restaurant I loved. I ordered pasta and a glass of red wine. I ate slowly, savoring every bite. I was dining alone and I was content. The waiter asked if I was celebrating something. I thought for a second and then said yes. I said I was celebrating a good day at work. He smiled and later brought complimentary dessert. It was a tiramisu, light and delicious. I thanked him and left a generous tip. I walked home under a canopy of autumn stars. The air was crisp and smelled of wood smoke. My life was full and it was my own. It was not a reaction to a secret. It was a positive, forward-moving creation. I continued in my new role for months. The work was challenging in a different way. It was more about people and policies than paper. I found I enjoyed the strategic aspects. I enjoyed mentoring a wider group of staff. I enjoyed being a guardian of the institution's soul. One afternoon, a formal envelope arrived. It was from the Bar Association. They awarded the restitution fund's legal team a prize. The award was for innovation in governance. I was invited as a guest of honor. The gala was black tie and televised locally. I debated whether to attend. My anonymity had been preserved until now. Attending could link me publicly to the case. I decided to go. I bought a simple, elegant black dress. I did not intend to speak or be interviewed. I would simply be present in the audience. The night of the gala, I took a taxi. The ballroom glittered with crystal and light. I found my assigned table at the back. The legal team sat at the front, receiving applause. Their managing attorney gave a gracious speech. She thanked whistleblowers and witnesses. She did not name them. She spoke of meticulous documentation's power. She called it the quiet artillery of truth. I felt pride from my secluded seat. Then she surprised me. She said one person exemplified this principle. She asked that person to please stand. She said, "The archivist who started it all." Every head turned, looking. I froze for a long second. Then I took a deep, calm breath. I stood up at my table. A spotlight found me blindingly bright. The room broke into warm, sustained applause. I gave a small, polite nod. I did not smile, but I did not frown. I simply acknowledged the moment. Then I sat back down quickly. The spotlight moved away. The speech continued and the moment passed. My heart pounded, but I felt no regret. My anonymity was pierced, but only in that room. It was a room full of allies. No media approached me afterwards. The team ensured my privacy was respected. A few people came to shake my hand. They thanked me for my courage. I accepted thanks modestly. I left the gala before dancing began. The cool night air felt like a blessing. My secret was now shared with a room of strangers. It felt strangely liberating. I carried the weight alone for so long. Now professionals shared the knowledge. They understood its significance and cost. I was no longer a solitary keeper of truth. I was a member of a community dedicated to justice. This was a new kind of power. It was the power of shared purpose. I slept more soundly that night than in years. The next week at the archive, nothing changed. No one mentioned the gala. It was not a public news story. My daily work continued uninterrupted. Only Chloe gave me a knowing look and smile. She must have seen the local broadcast. She never mentioned it. I appreciated her discretion. Life settled back into productive routine. Winter arrived with gentle snowfalls. They coated the city in white. I spent Christmas with family in another state. It was a loud, joyful, chaotic gathering. I embraced the noise and laughter. I played board games with nieces and nephews. I helped my mother in the kitchen. I felt completely present and grounded. I returned after the new year, refreshed. The city was quiet in the January lull. I appreciated the serene, empty streets. I appreciated the clear, cold sunlight. One day in early spring, I received a final report. It was the closure report for the restitution fund. The majority of identified artworks had been returned. Remaining funds were a permanent endowment. It would fund provenance research worldwide. The fund's mission was now institutionalized. It would outlive all of us who started it. This was the ultimate victory. It was a self-sustaining force for good. I filed the report in professional records. I saved a copy for my personal dossier. The story had truly reached its end. Justice mechanisms were now permanent. The bad system was replaced by a good one. The cycle was complete. That evening, I walked by the river. The water flowed steadily toward the sea. It was a constant, powerful movement. It reminded me time moves forward. It heals and carries. I stopped on a bridge and looked at the skyline. Buildings where secrets festered still stood, but they were just buildings now. They were neutral and empty of meaning. The meaning was in the people inside them. It was in the systems that governed them now. I turned and walked back toward my neighborhood. I passed the cafe where I saw Marcus Thorne. It was now a different cafe with a new name. The past was continually being overwritten. This was not a bad thing. It was the nature of cities and lives. We move forward, building new layers over old. The key is to build with better materials, to build with transparency and integrity. I reached my apartment building and climbed the stairs. I made a simple dinner and ate at my table. I listened to classical music on the radio. The notes were complex and beautiful. They required no analysis, only appreciation. Later, I sat with my own blank journal. I was not cataloging or documenting for work. I was writing my own thoughts, messy and unformed. I wrote about the river's flow feeling. I wrote about the taste of evening air. I wrote about quiet satisfaction of a life lived well. These were my private documents. They held no reveals or power shifts. They held only the quiet truth of a calm existence. I wrote until my hand grew tired. Then I closed the journal and put away the pen. I turned off the lights and went to bed. The city's night sounds were a familiar lullaby. I drifted into deep, dreamless sleep. I had no more secrets to uncover. I had no more battles to fight. I had only the peaceful, ordinary business of living. And that was the greatest reward of all. Spring deepened into lush, green warmth. My daily rhythm held gentle certainty. The promotion brought longer-term projects. I oversaw the archive's first full ethical audit. It was a thorough, year-long process. Every donor file underwent a compliance review. My team found minor inconsistencies, but they found no major ghosts. The systems we built were working. This was profound professional satisfaction. Chloe took on more responsibility eagerly. She flagged a potential issue with a new donation. It was a collection of rare maps. The donor requested specific access restrictions. Chloe felt they were overly broad. She brought the file to me for review. We examined the proposed agreement together. I guided her through negotiation points. We drafted a counter-proposal. It protected both access and donor privacy. The donor accepted our revised terms graciously. Chloe beamed with quiet pride. She navigated her first ethical challenge successfully. She used the tools we created together. I felt deep continuity in that moment. Knowledge was being passed forward. It was applied with skill and confidence. The archive was in good hands for the future. Summer arrived with a burst of festival energy. I took a 2-week vacation. I traveled to a small coastal country in Europe. I had no itinerary and no professional purpose. I simply wanted to see art and architecture. I visited museums and walked ancient streets. I ate food I had never tasted before. I listened to languages I did not understand. It was a sensory delight. In one museum, I turned a corner in a gallery. I saw a familiar painting on the wall. It was the Flemish portrait from Anya's studio. A small plaque explained its full provenance. It detailed its loss during war. It detailed its recent restitution. It hung on indefinite loan now. It was available for the public to see. Its journey from darkness to light was complete. I stood before it for a long time. The haunting face seemed peaceful now. It was home, even if in a public institution. Its story was told honestly on the label. I felt closure so deep it was physical. A quiet warmth spread through my chest. I played a small part in this homecoming. That was enough. More than enough. I left the museum and sat in a sunny square. I drank a small, strong coffee. I watched people pass. Life was moving everywhere in all its forms. After my trip, I returned to work rejuvenated. The audit process entered its final reporting phase. I compiled findings into a clear document. It showed a clean bill of health. The director presented it to the board with pride. Our institution's integrity was demonstrably strong. This success attracted positive attention. Other cultural organizations sought our consultation. I began a limited advisory role for a national library. I traveled one day a month to their headquarters. I shared our protocols and lessons learned. I avoided mentioning the specific past case. I spoke in universal principles and practical steps. These conversations were stimulating and collegial. My network expanded in wholesome directions. I met conservators, librarians, and digital archivists. We discussed digital preservation and data privacy. The world of information was vast and evolving. My small corner felt meaningful and connected. One evening, I hosted a small dinner party. I invited Kells and 2 new colleagues. We cooked a simple meal together. We drank wine and talked about books. The conversation was light and laughter-filled. No one discussed crime or corruption. We discussed best beaches and worst movie adaptations. It was wonderfully ordinary. Kells helped me wash dishes afterwards. She told me I looked truly happy. I said I was. She said it was a good look on me. Autumn brought the annual archive gala again. This time I attended without reluctance. I wore a blue dress and enjoyed the evening. I spoke with donors about passions for history. Their enthusiasm was genuine and infectious. I no longer viewed them with suspicion. I saw them as preservation partners. The shadow was gone from my perception. The event felt like a celebration of shared purpose. After the gala, I walked home through crisp night. The city felt like an old friend. Its sounds and smells were comforting and familiar. I arrived at my building and checked my mailbox. There was a single postcard inside. The picture was of distant mountain ranges. The handwriting on the back was Arthur Finch's. It said only, "The numbers are clean here, thank you." It was postmarked from a small town abroad. I held the postcard and smiled. He had found his peace as well. He was somewhere quiet, keeping clean books. I placed the postcard on my refrigerator. I used a magnet to hold it there. It was a final artifact from that time, a final message from a silent ally. It belonged in my kitchen, not a dossier. It belonged to my present life. The circle of resolution was fully closed. Winter arrived softly again. I spent more evenings at home reading. I joined a book club at a local bookstore. We read fiction and debated themes. It was delightful intellectual exercise with no stakes. It was pure enjoyment of narrative and language. My life was rich with simple pleasures. The year turned, and another began. Time moved in its gentle, forward flow. On Lena's death anniversary, I did not visit the cemetery. I instead made a donation in her name. I donated to an archival student fund. It provided scholarships for ethics studies. I listed her as the memorial honoree. I received a thank you note from the fund. They said a student named Lena would receive support. The coincidence of the name felt like a sign. A new cycle was beginning tangibly. Another Lena would be helped to learn. She would enter a field made safer. The legacy was becoming real and generative. I framed that thank you note. I placed it beside the rose photograph in my office. It represented growth and future hope. My office walls became a gallery of good outcomes. Work continued to be engaging and purposeful. I helped develop a digital ethics curriculum. It was for archivists with digital collections. Challenges were new, but principles were timeless. Transparency, accountability, and preservation of truth. These were constants in a changing landscape. I found satisfaction applying old wisdom to new problems. One afternoon, the director called me in. She told me she would retire next year. The board began a search for her successor. She asked if I would consider applying. I was surprised and deeply honored. I told her I needed time to think. Leading the entire archive was a monumental responsibility. It was also a tremendous opportunity to shape its future. I discussed it with Kells over our lunch. She listened, then asked a simple question. Did the idea feel like a burden or a calling? I sat with that question for a long moment. I realized it felt like a calling. It felt like the natural culmination of my journey, from notating a discrepancy to guiding an institution. It was a path of increasing responsibility for integrity. I decided to apply for the position. The process was lengthy and rigorous. I underwent multiple interviews with the board. I presented my vision for the archive's next decade. I spoke about ethical stewardship as our core brand. I talked about inspiring public trust through transparency. Board members asked tough, thoughtful questions. The final interview ended with handshakes. Weeks of waiting followed. I focused on my current work. I tried not to dwell on the decision. Then the call came from the board chair. They offered me the director position. I accepted with a calm, steady voice. After hanging up, I let out a long breath. I looked around my deputy director's office. I would soon move to the corner office. The view would be even broader. The announcement was made to staff the following week. There was a warm reception and congratulations. Chloe gave me a hug and said she was proud. My predecessor expressed full confidence in me. The transition would take 3 months. I began preparing for the larger role. It involved budgets and strategic planning. It involved external relations. I was eager for the new challenges. My last act as deputy director was symbolic. I went to the oldest basement storage room. I found the locked drawer Lena's key opened. I had never removed the map and badge. The drawer remained empty since that day. I took a new sheet of archival paper. I wrote a single sentence on it. "This silence is clean." I placed the paper inside the drawer. I closed and locked it once more. I left the key in the lock. Let someone find it in another 20 years. Let them find a note about clean silence. Let them have no mysterious trail to follow. That was my final wish for that drawer. I walked back upstairs to the modern offices. The past was properly archived. The present was ready to be led into the future. My first day as director arrived on a sunny Monday. I wore a suit bought for the occasion. I unlocked the door to the corner office. It was spacious and filled with light. My predecessor left it clean and empty for me. I brought in my few personal items. The photograph of the woman and painting, the picture of the rose, the thank you note for the scholarship. I set them on a shelf where I could see them. Then I sat at the large, empty desk. I opened the top drawer. Inside was a single folder. It was labeled Current Priorities. I opened it and began to read. The work of leading was already laid out. It was full of meetings and budgets. It was the ledger of an institution's life. I was now its chief author and guardian. I felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where I was meant to be, not in shadows chasing secrets, but in light, building and protecting something good. The intercom on my phone buzzed softly. My new assistant said my first meeting was ready. I closed the folder and stood up. I straightened my jacket and walked to the door. I stepped out into the bustling archive hallway. Staff nodded and smiled as I passed. I entered the conference room where the team waited. They looked to me for agenda and direction. I smiled and greeted each person by name. Then I began the meeting about our public exhibition. We discussed which collections to feature. We talked about engaging the community. The conversation was collaborative and energetic. I facilitated, listening more than I spoke. This was my new work. It was about nurturing an institution's health. It was about fostering a culture of excellence and ethics. The meeting ended with clear action items. I returned to my office and looked out the window. The city stretched out below, vibrant and alive. It held countless stories in its buildings. The Meridian Archive held a fraction of those stories. My job was to care for them honestly. That evening, I left the archive later than usual. The building was quiet, settling in for night. I rode the elevator down to the gleaming lobby. The night security guard waved as I passed. "Good night, Director Vance," he said. The title still felt new and strange. I nodded and wished him a good night. I stepped out into cool evening air. Streetlights cast pools of gold on the sidewalk. I decided to walk for a while before heading home. I passed the metro entrance, now just mundane. I walked through the park where I met Kells. I walked by the botanical garden where I met Anya. These places held memories, but were just places now. They were part of my city's geography. They were not my personal battlefield. I finally turned toward my neighborhood. I stopped at a small grocery store. I bought fresh bread and flowers. I continued to my apartment building. I climbed the stairs, my steps light. I unlocked my door and entered my peaceful home. I put the flowers in a vase of water. I placed them on the kitchen table. I made a simple supper of bread and cheese. I ate while listening to a jazz record. The music was complex and soothing. After dinner, I washed my single plate. I sat in my armchair with a novel. I read until my eyes grew heavy. I marked my page and turned off the light. I got ready for bed and slid under covers. The city's night hum was constant and gentle. I thought about the next day's meetings. I thought about long-term plans for the archive. My mind was full of future possibilities, not past puzzles. I fell asleep easily. I dreamed of light-filled rooms and orderly shelves. I dreamed of quiet work that mattered. There were no chases or hidden trains. There were no secret documents. There was only calm. Purposeful preservation. I woke with the dawn feeling rested and clear. I made coffee and watched the sun rise. The sky turned from gray to pink to gold. It was a new day, full of ordinary potential. I dressed for work and gathered my things. I locked my apartment door behind me. I walked to the metro station amidst the morning crowd. I boarded the train and found a seat. The train moved forward into the new day. It traveled its published, honest route. It carried me toward my purpose. It carried me toward a life built with care. It carried me home.